this court and jury, and the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Kindly follow the officer.
Still, have a seat. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Dr. Downs, could you spell your full name for the court reporter and introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please?
James Claude Upshaw Downs, M.D. Do you want the whole thing spelled out?
I think James and Downs would be okay.
Okay, I go by Jamie, J-A-M-I-E.
And your last name?
Downs, D-O-W-N-S.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Downs. What do you do?
I am a consultant in forensic medicine. Basically, my full-time job is I review autopsies and crime scenes and try to determine if I'm able cause, manner of death, and how an injury came to be. I also teach on that subject as well. Part-time, I am the medical director for the physician assistant program at Charleston Southern University.
Okay. And before being a full-time consultant, have you recently retired from a specific job?
Yes, ma'am. I retired after about 14 years from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I was a medical examiner in Savannah for them for 14 years.
And before that?
Before that, I was the chief medical examiner and the director of the state of Alabama's forensics department. So I ran the 10 labs we had throughout the state, as well as chief medical examiner over about 10 to 13, depending on how our staff was, medical examiners.
And, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
Prior to that, I was a state medical examiner in Mobile, Alabama. I was there for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown, where I was medical examiner for 5 years. And during that same period, I was completing my medical postgraduate training, residency and fellowship.
Okay. And where did you graduate medical school?
The Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston.
And then what is the education that you have to go on after that to become what you are now, a forensic pathologist?
So following that, I completed my residency postgraduate medical training in anatomic pathology and clinical pathology. That was also at the Medical University of South Carolina.
Could I stop you and have you explain to the ladies and gentlemen what anatomic pathology is and what clinical pathology is?
Sure, let me break it down. Pathology is basically the medicine of using the laboratory to study disease. There are two parts of that. Anatomic has to do with the body and tissues. Clinical is the labs. So, for example, anatomic pathologist would be if you had an appendix problem, you had the appendix taken out at surgery. The anatomic pathologist would look at the tissue under the microscope and tell you what was wrong with it. If you happen to pass away due to the appendix, the anatomic pathologist would be the physician that performs the autopsy to find out what happened medically. Clinical pathology is using the laboratory part. So actually you would be doing the blood work for the person who had an appendix out and running that lab.
Okay. And then did you continue your training to get board certifications in those two areas?
Yes, ma'am.
And what does a board certification mean?
Board certification means you have met the requisite requirements. You've successfully completed medical school and a certified or a qualified residency training program. Then once you complete that, in my case anatomic and clinical pathology, you are allowed to sit for the boards. That's as I recall, a 3-day exam, non-stop questions for 3 days, and hopefully you complete that successfully.
And you did complete both successfully, correct?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And those are as a result of your medical degree in dealing mainly with live patients for those board certifications, correct? Except for the autopsy that you indicated was for the anatomic pathologist.
Yes, ma'am. Well, anatomic does both. So, like I said, if you have your appendix taken out and you don't pass away from that, then the anatomic pathologist would look at the tissues under the microscope. So, actually, most patients in anatomic pathology are alive. The practicing physician out there would be called a surgical pathologist, which is just an anatomic pathologist specializing in surgical tissues.
Now, you got a third specialization after you graduated medical school and after you completed the boards in anatomic and clinical pathology. Did you not, sir?
Yes, ma'am, I did. It's actually a subspecialty called forensic pathology.
And what is forensic pathology?
Basically, that applies the medicine of pathology in a context of sudden, unexpected, unnatural death and or injury. Again, basically something happens to someone and the forensic pathologist tries to determine what that is and collect any evidence associated with that.
And that's what you did, be a forensic pathologist for how much of your career?
Really all my career. When I started residency in '88, I did 1 year of just that. Then in '89, July 4th weekend actually, I started doing forensic pathology as a deputy medical examiner in Charleston, and I did that continuously ever since.
Until you retired recently?
Yes, ma'am. I retired from the state of Georgia, 27 years working for the man. I decided it was maybe time to work for myself for a while.
Okay. Now, in addition to your experience, by the way, have you testified in the United States of America?
Yes, ma'am, quite a bit.
And could you give us just a short history of, for instance, how many states you've testified as an expert forensic pathologist or pathologist in?
I've given sworn testimony in probably 20 different states, as well as testimony for military, for the Air Force, as well as for the Army. Also testified before subcommittees of the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives. Also testified before the National Commission on Forensic Sciences.
Okay. And when you testified in those areas, did you also testify about this wound analysis reconstruction in terms of determining wound, what happened when somebody dies?
Yes, ma'am. That's the practice of forensic pathology. So, yes, ma'am. It may be more or less in an individual case, but yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have you taught?
Yes, ma'am, quite a bit.
What about?
Really all aspects of forensic pathology. Areas that I have special interest in are child abuse, use of force, elder abuse and neglect. In fact, I just finished hosting a seminar at Charleston Southern on vulnerable victims that really ran the gamut.
How about in the area of wound analysis, reconstruction, or being a scene pathologist? Have you taught in that?
Yes, ma'am, many times. Most recently, specifically in that would be for the Atlanta Police Department back in September, I believe.
Have you taught at the FBI Academy?
Yes, ma'am, quite a bit.
In the same areas that you mentioned, the wound analysis, scene reconstruction, forensic pathology?
Yes, ma'am, I have. Actually, I wrote the textbook for them that's still used today, the Forensic Investigators Trauma Atlas.
Okay. And what about other areas such as the National Forensic Academy? Have you taught there?
Yes, ma'am. I am on the board of directors for the Law Enforcement Innovation Center at the University of Tennessee. And part of that program, we have the National Forensic Academy, which basically takes law enforcement crime scene folks and brings them up to speed about how to properly process a crime scene, what should be collected and documented. And I, for years, did the forensic pathology of that.
Now, you provided us in Discovery and the prosecution with a copy of your most recent CV, which is 8 pages, correct?
I'll take your word for the number, but yes, ma'am.
I'd like to approach, Your Honor. Could you tell us, Dr. Downs, is this a copy of your most current CV that you provided all of us?
Yes, ma'am, that's actually 9 pages.
9 pages, I apologize. And if I were to go through all of this, this would be the areas that I would ask you about that's in your CV.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. May I have this marked an exhibit rather than delay the jury from going through it all, Your Honor?
Is there an objection?
It does an exhibit, it's for identification.
Rather than go through everything, I'd rather just...
Let me see you at sidebar. All right, the curriculum vitae will be received. Exhibit 382?
383.
383, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Downs. We don't have to go through the rest of this right now. All right, now, you have written, how many gunshot wounds have you seen?
Oh my goodness, 27 years, I'd say well over 2,000.
Okay. And have you written about gunshot wounds and whether or not you can determine the path of a bullet through gunshot wounds?
Yes, ma'am, and that trauma atlas that I wrote for the FBI, specifically there's a chapter in there that covers that topic.
Okay. And you were here when Dr. Lindstrom testified on Friday before the jury, the medical examiner?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you were introduced to the prosecutors before she testified, right? You met them all?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I don't think I met them all, but I shared an elevator up, I know, with Mr. Lee, and met with him again this morning.
Okay. Now, I'd like to bring the jury's attention back to some of the exhibits that were utilized last week when we discussed the medical examiner, so we can go from there. Oh, by the way, Dr. Lindstrom testified that she had taken a course from you. Do you remember her?
Honestly, I have to say I don't. I teach a lot of classes in a lot of different places.
Okay.
I've taught all over, actually, U.S., Canada, Ireland. I've been around a little bit. Turkey.
All right. So, do you give your number out for people to call you if they have a question?
Actually, I routinely have my email and my phone number available, and it's in my teaching materials. That's usually the first or last slide if I do a PowerPoint.
Okay. So you're accessible.
Quite. I'm also, you can get my Forensics is my name of my business, and it's online.
Okay. Now,
Objection overruled.
I'd like to show you what was marked 371A. Now, freeze. Okay. All right. You see that, Doctor?
Yes, ma'am.
You've seen that before, correct?
We have them on our screen blackout.
All right, we're going to put it right back in right now. No. Still not there?
It'll go quicker if it
Okay.
stays blackout.
Thank you. All right. You recall this, you've seen this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is purportedly a fair and accurate representation of the wounds of Mr. D'Abreu, correct?
I recall that was the way it was presented. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then you've seen a number of other exhibits, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you saw all the exhibits that Dr. Lindstrom testified to?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
Okay, not here, but in a different packet that you received, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, before we get into the specifics of the autopsy reports of Mr. Furtado and Mr. D'Abreu, I'd just like to ask you about some basic concepts, okay, in the forensic pathology world, right?
Sure.
What is bullet wipe?
Bullet wipe is the residue, basically it's grease and dirt that is on the outside of the bullet. As it goes down the barrel of a gun, it will pick up this grease that lubricates the bullet and whatever dirt happens to be there. Then when the projectile goes through the air, it carries that grease, dirt with it. If it hits a target, for instance, a shirt, skin, it'll wipe that grease off, and we call that bullet wipe. It's black dirt grease.
Okay, and you as a forensic pathologist have had, with your over 2,000 gunshot wounds, you've seen bullet wipe on skin, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Does bullet wipe come off skin easy?
Yeah, you just wipe it off. It's grease. It's like working on your car and you get a little black grease on your finger. You just wipe it.
Okay, and that's how it reacts on skin, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you also, as a forensic pathologist, deal with what is called gunshot residue, correct?
Correct.
And do you, as a forensic pathologist, when you have a gunshot wound in front of you, usually know at the time, you know whether or not there's been test shooting on fabric to see if the purported gun that killed somebody is 2 feet, 3 feet, 2 inches, 3 inches away? Do you normally have that at autopsy?
Have the information in advance of the autopsy?
Yes.
The objection is overruled.
I don't recall ever in my career having the testifying results prior to performing an autopsy examination.
And why would that be, sir?
Because usually the autopsy is done hopefully the next day, and if not, then maybe a couple of days later, and they're not far enough into the investigation of a case to have a weapon, let alone get it into the lab and get it in line to be tested.
So what do medical examiners do then to determine possible ranges of gunshots if they don't have the test firings from a GSR spread pattern?
overruled.
We are trained in the practice of interpreting residue. It's a very good estimate. It's not exact, but within a certain range of fire, for example, 2 feet, you'll get little pieces of partially burned and unburned gunpowder that will stick to whatever the surface is. If it's a shirt, they'll stick to the shirt. If they're the skin, they'll hit the skin and cause little abrasions. An abrasion is like you fall on the sidewalk and skin your knee. That's an abrasion. The powder particles do the same thing, except they're really small. So since they're small, they're pinpoint, we refer to that as stippling. So if you have just that stippling pattern, we get a range of fire out to maybe a couple of feet, 24, 26 inches. It's not exact, but a couple of feet. You get closer into maybe a foot, closer than that, you'll also get the smoke, because what is a bullet but gunpowder, and that catches fire. So it burns, you get smoke. So if you get close enough, you'll get the smoke. That occurs within maybe out to 12 inches down to contact range. And that's our experience. We can also interpret directionality if there happens to be gunshot residue on a body or clothing.
All right, so you can tell then whether something is an intermediate shot or a long-range shot or even a contact shot, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But you can't tell direct distance. Is that what you just said?
The one point I should make is in what's called a long range or a distant range shot, that assumes that there's no intermediate target. For instance, if I had a gun and shot it through this screen, then whatever gunshot residue would be on the screen, not on what I was actually shooting at. So if you ask me if there's no intermediate target, yes, I'm comfortable saying that's a distant range shot.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of scenes, do you go to scenes as a medical examiner?
I did routinely. When I was in training, we went to every suspicious death scene, every homicide scene. I actually had 5 years of training in doing scenes before I took my job outside of the medical university. And when I was in Mobile, we went to every homicide scene, every suspicious death.
Now, you did not have the luxury or the time of seeing the BMW in this case, correct?
No, ma'am. I did specifically ask to see that and was informed that it wasn't available.
Okay. Did you go to the Boston Police Department laboratory?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you view there?
I looked at several projectiles, bullets. I looked at clothing that was packaged and looked at a small fragment of glass. And then later on went to look at the Forerunner.
Okay. And when we say the Forerunner, you mean the Toyota Forerunner?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you view video of the scene of the shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you actually visit the scene?
Yes, ma'am. Retrospectively, I went after the fact because obviously 5 years later it's not there anymore for me. The vehicles aren't there.
Okay, so you actually saw the intersection of Chalmette and Tremont.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm trying to get rid of my New Jersey accent when I say Chalmette. All right. So let's talk then, sir, about. By the way, you also went to the medical examiner's office, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the purpose of that visit?
I wanted to look at the X-rays directly. What I saw, I had some questions about, so I wanted to make sure that what I saw on the X-rays that I received was actually what was there.
And what do you mean by that?
The X-rays were really dirty. There was a lot of material on the plates or on the images that weren't projectiles. So when you're looking for at an X-ray for a bullet, you're looking for something that appears white. And these had a lot of white little dots here and there all across the film. And I'm interpreting that as artifact because I don't believe it was real. And I kept seeing that repeated pattern in a lot of places on the X-rays.
Okay. And were you able to tell what was real and what wasn't after you compared the originals with the copies that you had?
Well, they were showing me the same thing, so I know what was a artifact. I could say, okay, this is a repeating artifact versus this is a projectile, because the views are a little different.
Okay. Now, I'm going to show you, Doctor, getting to the autopsies, what was marked last week as Exhibit 376. And I don't know if you can see that. Did Jerry see that? Okay. You've seen this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you created it, correct?
That's correct. I didn't create the underlying animation image, but from the existing image that was a screen capture, I captured that image and then put it next to the black and white version on the right.
All right. And the screen capture was a screen capture what the prosecutors had done as a movie exhibit?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And then on the right, what is that?
That's the wound as it existed in reality.
Okay. And I'm going to show you today additional pictures regarding that specific wound. And while I'm finding those, could you tell the jury of what wound that specifically is?
That is the wound to the right upper arm at the shoulder area in Mr. Furtado.
May I approach you, Aaron?
You may.
Dr. Downs, I'm going to show you right now what's been what hasn't been marked, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to ask if you recognize those.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I'm going to show you a separate one that I'm going to ask to be marked later for identification. I'm going to ask if you recognize that.
Yes, ma'am.
May I have the first 5, Your Honor, marked? And then this for exhibits and the second one for identification.
The first 5, are they all relating to the
Yes.
same wound?
Yes, they are, sir.
Then why don't we mark them with letter designations, 384, A through F, E.
Each for 4 inches for identification.
Yes, what, a diagram?
Diagram.
Very good. Take no objection, Mr. Lee?
Not for identification.
All right, doctor. Let's discuss first this wound that that was discussed last week with the jury, and that would be the wound on Mr. Furtado's arm, right arm. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'd like to draw the jury that attention. All right. I'm going to show you what is been marked 384A. Jury see that? Okay. And doctor, what is that?
This is the wound to the Mr. Furtado's right arm that we were just talking about at the upper arm shoulder area.
Okay. And that's in black and white, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I'd like to show you the second exhibit, which is 2 photographs. And can you see that all? And what is this, doctor?
This is the same area, the same wound that we're talking about on the left in black and white, and then a close-up of that same injury in color.
Okay. And You focused on this wound, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And why did you focus on this wound?
This wound is, to my interpretation of the case, one of the more important injuries in that it gives me the position that Mr. Furtado had to be in, relative position at the scene when this shot was inflicted.
Okay. And there's a close-up photo of that wound that you just identified, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked 384C. Do I have that positioned correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What is this?
This is a extremely close-up photograph of the same injury we've been talking about.
And why was this close-up photograph important to you, sir?
The area of abrasion that is at the 4 to 5 o'clock border. Can I mark on the screen?
Yes, this is a telestrator, so you can actually draw on it, and we can erase it, or we can print it out.
So the area I've just indicated in yellow is what's called an abrasion border. If you remember, I described abrasions. You fall on the sidewalk, skin your knee, that's an abrasion. Well, as the bullet goes into the body, it does the same thing. It rubs against the skin surface. And I can look at an abrasion border and get an estimate of the directionality as that bullet entered from looking at that. I know based on where that abrasion border is, that bullet had to be traveling, as we're looking at this, up and to the left.
Okay, and on me, could you just show me where?
Your Honor, may I step down?
May I approach? Just show where on me.
It's going to show directionality on you. All right, you may.
Thank you, sir.
Zipper right here, so you can't block.
So, again, as that's directed, it's roughly, make it easier, roughly that general direction.
You want to see that? This one? On the directionality?
I'm fine.
All right, thank you. All right. And is that directionality going to be important in any wound reconstruction to get shooting reconstruction?
Yes, ma'am. That to me allows me as a forensic pathologist to look at the wound and position the body, because bullets travel in straight lines unless something else happens. For instance, if you hit concrete, a bullet might deflect.
Okay.
So bullets generally travel in a straight line. So if I see this and I see another injury, generally that's going to be a straight line. But that doesn't mean that if I have a part of the body that moves, like an arm, that when I do the autopsy, those 2 points are my straight line, because I have to move in the arm, I have to move that point to get the right straight line.
Okay, so we're going to just show you the next exhibit, which is 384E. And I think I have this here. What is that? And we have to clear this. Okay, all right. Getting the hang of it for 6 weeks. What is that?
If you could rotate that 90 degrees clockwise, other way. Thank you. So this is the same injury that we were just looking at. This is taken from the body, which is, he's on his belly, and the shot is taken from the back, looking down on the body. This is a close-up cropped image of that right upper arm shoulder area, and there's a trajectory rod that's been placed along the wound track.
All right. And let me just show you the next exhibit, which is a more, the right side is the actual autopsy photo, Dr. Downs?
That's correct.
And the left side is what?
This is from the animation that was done, shown in court Friday.
Okay. And what is wrong with the animation?
Well, you can look at the...
Sustained.
All right. What is different from the animation portion that is shown here from the actual trajectory rod that is trying to show trajectory in the autopsy picture?
Well, the first thing I notice is the path is incorrect. If you look at them, those two rods are not level. They should be parallel if what you're trying to show is the same thing that's on the right. Now, the body's turned a little bit, so I can understand that. But looking at the right arm wound that we've been talking about with the trajectory rod, you can see the skin there. If you look close at the close-up, it's pushed up. There's tension on that skin.
And what does that mean?
That means that the arm, as Dr. Lindstrom testified Friday, she moved the arm to put the rod in, and that's an important consideration in this case. She said correctly that you want to go very carefully with the rod so you don't damage tissue. So it's typical that if you've got something in an arm and you're trying to line it up, you move the arm. Typically, you take a photograph of that to show this is how this arm had to be positioned to get the body, to get that rod into the body. That didn't happen here. So the arm, for some reason, was moved down.
I'll see you at sidebar. The objection is sustained. Jury, please disregard the last question and answer. And Ms. Kinney-Bodden, feel
Okay.
free to rephrase.
Thank you, sir. All right, Dr. Downs, without discussing whether something is right or wrong that was done, testified to, I would like you just to discuss this picture here, and you can use your telestrator, okay? What is it about this rod that is important if you're trying to determine how the bullet or how Mr. Furtado was positioned at the time he was shot?
The skin tension that we talked about right here indicates to me that that rod wants to travel upward.
And what does that mean for positioning of the arm?
That means that I would need to move that arm up away from the body until the rod gets to the alignment. And actually what I would do is I would start that way to not create an artificial pathway. So I would lift the arm and work the rod in from the exit until I got to that point, and then I would move the arm up and down until I got it to the right, and then when I dropped the arm, I would get something that looked like this.
Okay, so you would, was your testimony, you would move the arm up and so the skin is not pulling?
Yes, ma'am.
And when the skin is not pulling, what does that mean?
That means I've approximated the actual trajectory of the shot in that part of the body and how the body was positioned as it went through.
Okay. Now, just make sure I don't walk away with exhibits. Let me show you two more photographs. I'll do three. Have you seen these, sir?
Yes, ma'am, I created, except for the last one.
And the last one is what? Just
That is a photograph of the head wound
of who?
of Mr. Furtado. The back head wound, there's two to the head. This is the back one.
Okay. Your Honor, could I have the first two marked as a set and the second one marked separately?
No, I haven't seen it.
All right, any objection?
To two of them, Your Honor, not to the third.
Let's see you. You're offering both as exhibits.
Yes, sir.
Any objection to them being received as exhibits?
Not beyond what was discussed at the sidebar.
All right. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Downs, let me show you what's been marked Exhibit 386. Do I have this positioned correctly?
No, ma'am, you need to rotate that 90 degrees counterclockwise.
Like this?
That's correct.
And what is that the jury's looking at?
This is the back head wound of Mr. Furtado's right head.
Okay. And was that important in some way for you to determine his position at the time he was shot?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, why?
If you could clear the screen for me. I'm not sure where that control is.
It's over here.
Upper right.
I got it.
Again, we just discussed with the arm wound the abrasion border. In this case, there's an abrasion border at roughly the 3 o'clock edge, indicating the bullet had to be traveling in that direction, as we're looking at the screen from the right to the left. In order to get that, this is a very long abrasion border. What that means is the bullet's entering in an angle, a pretty sharp angle, downward towards the skin surface. It's closer to the skin surface. In order to get that in his head has to be turned towards the weapon that fired that shot.
And what do you mean?
If the shot were, say, coming from where the microphone is placed here, head would have to be turned to the right, not necessarily looking right at it, but in that direction.
And would that be the same head turning in the direction of the way the arm was shot?
Yes, ma'am.
And is there something similar about the two abrasion collars on both the head wound of Mr. Furtado and the arm wound of Mr. Furtado that were important to you?
They both helped me determine directionality and how the body was positioned, had to be positioned when these shots were inflicted.
Why? Why does the abrasion collar do that?
Again, what we do is we assess the abrasion border. Back in the old days, before we had x-rays, pathologists had to do autopsies and locate bullets without any x-ray at all. And so we learned how to interpret these abrasion borders. It helped us find the bullet. In this case, we do have x-rays, but I have the injury here that I can look at and say, oh, this bullet had to be traveling, in Mr. Furtado's case, from his face area towards the back of his head, because we know it exits to the left side. So it's really, those 2 points are a straight line. So in order to line that up with where the shot came from, his head has to be turned facing the weapon.
Now, when you went to the lab, you also saw Mr. Furtado's shirts, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Including the plaid one, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you make measurements to determine how far down the bullet hole was on the back of the shirt of Mr. Furtado and also in the arm shirt?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And as a result of making that measurements and from what you reviewed, did we also able to determine the path of the bullet through the car? Well, let me show you Exhibit 385. Could you explain what the cream colored here and this directionality arrow means?
Okay, so what we're looking at in the inset, the lower right-hand corner, is the injury that we just looked at. It's a sketch of that wound.
Was that done at your direction?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that fairly and accurately depict what you feel is the abrasion collar, and could you point to that?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you point that on the screen? We can clear it. Okay, thank you. All right, what does the rest of the arrow mean?
So what that tells me, what I've done here is take the image, rotate it until it fits with the exit. And now, using that abrasion border, moving that up from 4 to 5 up to about 3 o'clock, you can see the general direction. And in order to get that position, I have to elevate the arm, like I said. We know the shot exits the back closer to the midline. I think that's about 6 3/4 inches apart, the total pathway there. And so the blue arrow there is showing what would be a downward direction anatomically within his torso. Not counting his arm, just in his torso. Once I move his arm up, then if you look at that position, the shot is still continuing downward. But then I look at that in the context of the scene, and I know that that position is not how he was positioned at the scene.
Why?
Because it's going downward, and in the headrest, there's a shot that's not. It's going the other way.
All right. And we have a picture of the headrest that you pulled out to look at this?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
You may.
One of your exhibits. Is that the headrest with the dowels that you pulled out to demonstrate your point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. May I have this marked, Your Honor? It's one of the column exhibits that we couldn't find this morning, so just like to be marked. It's the next exhibit.
387.
Is this the exhibit you pulled out, what's marked now 387, to demonstrate the point about the directionality?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is, if I have the two here, let's see if I can get the two kind of side by side. What is the import of the fact that the directionality anatomically goes downward and the directionality that you saw in the Dallas goes upwards?
If you could do me a favor and straighten the one on the left. So it's going straight up and down. Okay, so looking at the one on the left that we just talked about, the blue arrow indicates the directionality as I have the body sitting straight up and the arm positioned extended outward. If you look on the right in the vehicle, what I see is the directionality again going the other way. So if you can rotate the image on your left so the blue arrow and the yellow arrow are in the same line, just rotate that one in your left hand, yeah, like that. So if we back that yellow arrow back up into Mr.
Pink arrow?
Furtado's,
Are you talking pink arrow or yellow arrow?
if we take this blue arrow and consider where he would be sitting in
You
front
mean
of...
your green arrow? We have a lot of colors going in up and downs.
Okay, I'm talking about this arrow right here.
Well, they can't tell that, so which one?
This arrow?
Okay,
Okay, is that better?
good.
Okay, so I look at that and I know the headrest shot has to be, those are fixed points. Again, 2 fixed points, there's no deflection there. So in order to get Mr. Furtado's body into that position, he has to be positioned kind of lunging to his right in front of the seat in order to account for the angle that you see in the headrest.
Sustained.
Did you come to some conclusions about how Mr. Furtado had to be positioned, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Were they easier demonstrated by using, did you also get an exemplar shirt?
Yes, ma'am.
And by an exemplar shirt, what do we mean?
It is a shirt that is the same brand, same size as what Mr. Furtado was wearing. And what I did was take the measurements from the photographs and then took blue duct tape so it was highly visible and put those where the bullets, the defects, the holes in the shirt are located.
And from somebody wearing that shirt seated down, can it be better be determined and easier for the jury to see what the position of Mr. Furtado was through that shirt and being seated?
I would think so, yes, ma'am.
Would it create no misrepresentation?
I don't see how it could.
Okay. Based on your analysis of how the wounds, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have this marked for identification, Your Honor? This is the shirt?
Yes, ma'am. Let me just see the back. Yes, ma'am.
That'll be received triple I, quadruple I.
Now, Dr. Downs, just say that for the moment. You said that you positioned the duct tape where the holes or tears, as they've been described by others, are in Mr. Furtado's original shirt.
Yes, ma'am.
And you saw the original shirt at the lab, correct?
Saw it, photographed it.
Did you make measurements?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have Mr. Favors put this on?
No.
May I put it on?
No.
All right. Your Honor, can we have a sidebar on this?
Yes. In fact, why don't we give our jurors a little bit of a morning recess? You didn't have one, but a short break.